Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, welcome to perhaps what will be the most fun talk we have today. Death. So I'm going to throw psychedelics in and make it even more interesting. I also noticed when I got here this morning that I'm an hour after lunch, so I'm in the slot where most people like to take a little nap. So if my voice lulls you to sleep, I won't be offended. Okay, how do I advance the slides? Just the arrow? Okay, so this is just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today, hospice, death, and end of life. I am a hospice nurse and a death doula, and I've been working with the dying for quite some time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the research around using psychedelics near end of life, how they may help the dying, and then doing a bit of looking ahead. The looking ahead really is more societal and then kind of personal for you. So these statistics are from the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, and even to me, these are a bit shocking. In our country, nearly 50% of people who die on hospice care. More than half of those don't enter until their last 30 days. The average length of stay is 17 days, and 1 in 4 will die within 5 days. So what does this mean? Really, people are coming into their end-of-life care in crisis. They're in an emergency state, especially if they haven't prepared for it physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Pain and symptom management are primary, so those other areas, emotional, psychological, and spiritual support, are not prioritized or cannot be. Anxiety, depression, and existential distress often become medicalized and treated pharmacologically with obvious poor success. I'd like to note this lady here. This lady in hospice looks super healthy. She's smiling. It's because I couldn't find a picture of someone who really looks like they're dying in hospice on your standard photos. Okay. A lot to be said about how our culture here in the West, especially in the United States, views death. And these are things that I've seen in my work. Western medicine is good at keeping people alive, but we struggle to support the dying. We don't even approach the notion of death until very late. I see that mortality and the complexities of death are often avoided in conversations. Many times when I'm in the home of people who are dying, the families say, don't even say death or hospice. I often see our elderly dying in nursing homes because so often we don't have the time, space, or ability to care for our loved ones during this time. Often people show up at the last minute, and I mean the last few days of someone's life, because they can't take off work. And this is just how we live in our culture. We idolize youth and beauty, but in aging and death, we often tuck away and hide ourselves. So going on to hospice means giving up, and it's avoided until the last minute. So demoralization is something that I have learned about through my years in hospice, and it includes the sadness, discouragement, resentment, and inability to cope related with someone who's facing imminent death. And in my 20 years as a hospice nurse, I see patients coming onto our service with some variation of the following 4 themes. How could this happen? Like, this isn't fair. I did everything right. I took care of myself. What was it all for? They don't know how to find meaning at the end of their life, or perhaps their meaning during their life they're not aware of it. They never mined those depths while they were alive. I will never give up. This is a difficult one, not only for the person dying, but for the family as well. And then last, of course, acceptance and surrender. After years of walking people through their last days in hospice care, holding their hands and watching their families scramble for meaning and watching them scramble for meaning,
I found myself wondering if we could do more than just manage pain. I wanted to help people face death with peace, not just with physical comfort. It was in a grad school research class that I stumbled across a study that said psilocybin-assisted therapy for end-of-life anxiety. I thought, wait, what? Mushrooms? For dying patients? Actually, I was super intrigued. And the more I read, the more it resonated. People weren't just having less anxiety, they were having meaning, insight, even a kind of peace. And it hit me, everything I'd ever wanted for my patients might be available at this intersection. So I went headfirst into the research, and what I found was beautiful, astonishing, not new, of course, but rediscovered. So just a little bit about the research. It started, using psychedelics for death started in the 50s with Stan Grof. And they used LSD. To me, right now, that just seems amazing to put someone through a 12-hour trip when they're facing death, but they were doing it. Their criteria for selection was suffering from some degree of physical pain, depression, anxiety, or psychological isolation. They had to have a terminal diagnosis with a reasonable life expectancy of at least 3 months. They were not working with people who had, maybe 4 weeks left to live. No brain metastasis or organic brain disease, and no gross psychopathology, so no schizophrenia, bipolar, etc. Close attention was paid on the relationship between the patient, the family, and the therapist, and they were given an IM dose of LSD. A therapist and a nurse was present. Eye shades and headphones with music were played. This model became a template for future research. 3/4 of the patients showed moderate or drastic improvement in symptoms, and profound experiences had a positive correlation to increased freedom from fear of death. And of course, we know, as Dr. Fadiman was talking earlier, there was a halt in research in 1970 because of Nixon. But we are in the midst of what we're calling a psychedelic renaissance, marked by a surge of research, public interest, and therapeutic exploration. We have a new generation of researchers with enhanced validity, safety, and integrity of the studies. So 3 of the more pivotal studies that worked with end of life were done by Griffiths, Grobe, and Ross, 3 separate studies. All 3 studies had patients with life-threatening cancer diagnoses with significant anxiety or depression. Each study used psilocybin. Of course, that time was reduced down to 6 or 7 hours. And their exclusion criteria was severe cardiovascular disease, abnormal hepatic or renal function, diabetes, personal or family history of schizophrenia or bipolar. Just a side note, these studies were years ago, and they're now actually working with patients that actually have these comorbidities, which is exciting to me. All 3 studies showed significant symptom reductions in anxiety, depression, and demoralization. Psilocybin was generally well tolerated with few adverse events, mostly mild and transient like anxiety and nausea. Psilocybin is now considered to have the highest safety profile of any psychedelic that's studied in research. I mean, imagine that. It's a plant that you can forage for and grow yourself. Highest safety profile. 70% of participants rated the experience as one of the top 5 most meaningful and significant experiences of their life. So why do these medicines produce such impressive results? Physiologically, they disrupt the default mode network, which shapes our sense of self and habitual thinking. Its quieting allows for new perspectives and ego softening. It interacts with serotonin receptors, influencing mood, perception, and cognition. And it creates a 72-hour window of neuroplasticity, with the brain becoming more flexible, forming new connections and patterns of thought. Research has actually shown 72 hours is your primary neuroplasticity, and then it goes out to 2 weeks, and it actually goes out at an even lower level for 3 months. Psychologically, the medicines can provide emotional catharsis and insight, surfacing and releasing buried emotions, breakthroughs in understanding one's own story and suffering, enhanced creativity and problem solving, loosening habitual thought patterns, allowing for new perspectives, metaphors, and ways of approaching life's challenges, and shifts in well-being and self-concept. Since I am, and I hope you are too, looking specifically at those facing death and the existential crises that come along with that, I'm going to focus a little more on the transcendent and expanded states of consciousness. While psychedelics can offer therapeutic benefits through emotional release and psychological insight, it's often the expanded or mystical states that leave the deepest mark. Experiences of unity, ego dissolution, or timelessness frequently correlate with lasting shifts in how people relate to life and death. Research states that the intensity of the psychedelic-induced transcendent or mystical experience correlates with increased feelings of death transcendence. The MEQ was developed by Walter Pahnke in the 60s and measures potential qualities of these experiences. As you can see up there, you're just garden variety spiritual experience. These don't include my personal favorite, which is sobbing because the tree in my backyard has just expressed her love for me. So let's look at unity and ego dissolution a little closer. I'm putting words to things that there aren't really words for, but I'm doing my best. Unity experiences can be a profound sense of oneness with everything, where boundaries between self and the world dissolve, often described as one drop in a vast ocean. Ego dissolution or death can be a more radical unbinding of identity, where the personal self temporarily disappears, perhaps leading to deep existential insight or transformation. Just a little sidestep here. This is an ancient inscription above the door of St. Paul's Monastery in Macedonia, North Greece. If you die before you die, you won't die when you die. Two fascinating books that really go into this, The Immortality Key and The Road to Eleusis, talking about the ancient Greek Eleusinian mysteries, a spiritual ritual that is speculated to have occurred in various iterations, if you read about it, for over 2 millennia, centering around the consumption of a presumed psychedelic substance called kykeon. The phrase, "die before you die," suggests that the participants in the mysteries underwent a symbolic death and rebirth during their experiences. And this is a whole other fascinating rabbit hole that I love. Because when I first encountered the phrase, "die before you die," it was in my studies and practice of Advaita Vedanta, a Hindu non-dual tradition. But as I've discovered, this theme runs through many spiritual and philosophical systems, including Sufism, Buddhism, Christian mysticism, and even existentialist philosophy with thinkers like Heidegger and Camus, suggesting that confronting death directly, we can peel away illusion and discover how to live more authentically. In this way, the psychedelic experience of unity or ego dissolution echoes something ancient and cross-cultural, a kind of sacred rehearsal for dying. And of course, many indigenous traditions have long used sacred medicines in ritual and ceremonial settings to guide individuals through profound initiatory experiences, often involving symbolic death, ego dissolution, or spiritual rebirth. These rites can mirror die before you die, a shedding of the old self in order to return with new insight, purpose, and relationship to life. Long before modern research, these cultures understood the power of these altered states to transform fear, realign values, and reconnect people to something greater than ourselves. So we, humanity, have been doing this for a while. Die before you die, with and without psychedelics. going to skip that part to save time. Just how do these experiences help someone facing death? So, their value isn't limited to the end of life. At any stage of adulthood, they have the potential to deepen meaning, clarify purpose, and help us live more fully now. But how do we create a culture that doesn't deny or avoid death? How can we live differently now that will allow us to find meaning at the end of our lives? These are my ideas. In my life, sitting at the bedside of those who are dying has shaped my life immeasurably. It actually is who I am, sitting with the dying, and has shaped every facet of my belief system. Without hesitation, I can tell you that I'm more loving, more forgiving, and definitely more courageous. So I invite you to expose yourself fully to and consider all the death that happens in your life. Each time a loved one or friend dies, deeply contemplate their life and their death. Contemplate how life goes on. Contemplate your own death. And then see how that changes your life now. I say expose your children to death because it is as natural as birth. The first breath we take when we're born, the day we're born, the only thing you can count on after that first breath is your last one on your last day. That's the one thing you know for certain. That's it. When you expose your children to death, they will learn of their own inevitable ending. They'll learn how to grieve, and they will learn how to contemplate and ask existential questions. Consider that death isn't just when a person dies, it's also all your endings, careers, marriages, other relationships, periods of your life, youth and middle age, all other things through a lifetime that pass out of existence. You can also see how new life emerges after those little deaths. Contemplate what a good death or dying well would mean for you. For me, it would be time to say goodbye, express gratitude, and with a fair amount of peace and acceptance. I see dying well as our last great act of love for those that we're leaving behind. As a hospice nurse, I've sat at the bedside of many people in their final days, and more often than not, what I hear are not regrets about the things they did, but things that they didn't do. These are the top 5 regrets in a book by Bonnie Ware. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself. I wish I had expressed my feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. And I wish I'd let myself be happier. These aren't just individual laments. They're cultural indicators. They point to the fact that many of us don't feel free to live fully, let alone die meaningfully. Psychedelics used wisely, ethically, and intentionally can offer more than symptom relief. They can offer clarity, connection, and glimpses of something greater than ourselves. I talk about death with dignity, but I really am looking for death with meaning. Denying people access to therapies that could ease existential distress, especially near the end of life, is not just a missed opportunity, it's an ethical failure. For those living with terminal diagnosis, time is limited, and so are options. Decriminalizing medicines isn't just about policy, it's about compassion. No one should have to choose between breaking the law and dying in fear. So the question isn't just how can we help people die well, it's also how can we help them live well now before it's too late? And maybe the answer starts by dying before we die.
Branda, thank you so much. I'm pulling up questions now, and we have one We have several. But first of all, thank you.
Wow.
That was a really sacred experience for a lot of us. This question comes from Tristan. Have you done any family sacraments related to a death in the family instead of just with the dying?
I have not had that opportunity, but I'm certainly welcome to it. I actually, as much as I'm excited about this work because of its legal status, I actually have not been able to offer psilocybin, which is my personal medicine of choice. It is my spiritual medicine, to anyone dying. I mean, I live in the Bible Belt and people are just afraid, especially many of the people who are dying are elderly. I have had the opportunity to work with people who are elderly from 70s into their 90s, but no one facing a terminal diagnosis. But man, am I ready. I'm really looking forward to it.
What are some ways that we can expose young people to death besides the deathbed?
Well, you have plenty of opportunities with like dead bugs and plants that have died, and when your pets die, or when somebody, a friend of the family or a distant relative or somebody, I mean, it's always lovely when the first death someone's exposed to is not a parent or a sibling, although that happens. But every time there's an ending, mark it. Mark it. Talk about how life goes on after. Talk about everything has its ending inherent in it, and that it's okay. And it's also okay to be sad and to grieve. Like, learn how to grieve. So many people don't even know how to grieve. And they don't take time to do it either. They go right back to work. You know, if their MO is avoidance and denial, it's certainly not going to change when the really hard things happen, right? Teach them from a young age. This is what happens. Things come in and out. Change is your constant, right?
So what does the literature say about the timing of psychedelics in death? So there's a dying where, one may provide psilocybin and then have the journey or experience meaning. And what about the actual time of death, like as you're approaching it? Has there been data around that, to ease the transition, anxiety, and getting ready for it?
I think research, they're always going to play it safe. They don't want anything bad. They certainly don't want anyone to actually die during an experience, so they're going to have it be a safe period before. In real world application, I feel like you could do a psychedelic within the last week. I personally feel that. I've sat with hundreds of people in their last day, week, month, and I really feel like depending on maybe I'm coming too close, depending on their symptoms, their comorbidities, all the medications that they're on, there's all kinds of things to consider, but I really think that someone could do it in their last week. I mean, they could have a little bit of a more challenging physiological journey, but they're already going through it anyway. But they're going through it physiologically anyway, and some people are so desperate for something to just give them some type of peace, relief. I see a lot of people pass just struggling, like they weren't ready. They didn't tie up any emotional, spiritual loose ends. Everything is frayed. And it's it's the hardest thing I witness is people struggling when they go. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience to watch someone rest in the awareness that they're going, and it doesn't mean they want it, but they surrender to it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. I would give it within a week if they wanted it and physiologically they could tolerate it.
And interestingly, oh, do we have another question?
Yeah, just one more.
Yeah.
I speak loud enough.
Okay.
You're good. Concerning end of life, like I'm a paramedic, so I get a little different take on it. And you do this debriefing kind of counseling, I understand, with ketamine and psilocybin. Do you see a difference between your disassociatives and your kind of classic hallucinogenics like LSD, psilocybin, versus the ketamine and the effects when it comes to like dealing with end of life stuff? Do you find the dissociative to be allowing a person to step back better, versus sometimes psilocybin and LSD can be a little more fight or flight, can be a little more to bring up, it's just a different experience.
Sure. Well, I just want to say up front that I haven't worked with LSD.
Okay.
I mean, I took it in my 20s. It was very, very startling. I wouldn't work with LSD with the dying because it's too long. There's too much of a body load. And I'll also be upfront about the fact that I haven't used ketamine with someone who's terminal, because the provider that I have for ketamine, I mean my prescriber, I think that he would prescribe for me for someone who is terminal, but to be honest, I don't trust his medical opinion around the physiological states of the dying. And I have a hospice and palliative care physician that just went through IPI training that's going to become my prescriber. So I actually have a hospice physician. So, and that just happened. So I can't answer your question because I haven't had the experience.
Thank you, Branda. And just as a note, I think it was Aldous Huxley in 1963 when he died, who requested it in writing that his wife give him a 100 microgram dose of LSD. So it has been done.
Yes.
Quite spectacularly.
During his death. That wasn't just like the day or the week of, like
He
yes.
was dying.
Yes.
So that's just an interesting little piece of trivia. I'm not giving any medical advice.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.